In this Teams Insider podcast, we get deep on SIP Gateway with Chandranshu, who is a PM on SIP Gateway. He was a PM actually before it launched, and we talk about the SIP Gateway journey and how initially it was just for supporting existing phones, and now it's moved on to a much bigger part to play to enable customers. Really hope you enjoy this conversation about SIP Gateway, and many thanks to Pure IP, who are the sponsor of this podcast. Really appreciate their support. On with the show. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I've been looking forward to this one. This is a topic that I don't think gets enough coverage and is definitely an interesting one for me coming from a voice background. We're going to talk all about Team SIP Gateway, kind of the history of it and where it is today. And I've got Chandranshu from Microsoft. He's over in India. Do you just want to introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background about yourself and your role?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. I'm Chandranshu. I'm a PM on Microsoft Teams SIP Gateway, and I've been with Microsoft for about 4 years and a quarter now, and pretty much that entire time I've been with Microsoft Teams SIP Gateway. Before Microsoft, I was working on a startup of my own that was into IoT devices and stuff. And it's been an exciting journey with Microsoft, and I'm super excited to work on this team and help our telephony customers.
Awesome. We've spoken a lot online, but this is the first time we've spoken face to face. So excited to have this conversation. So if 4 years, was that pre? I'm trying to think of the timeline. Was SIP Gateway, was that pre-launch, or was it already launched at that point?
No, it was pre-launch. So we shipped SIP Gateway to customers, and general availability was December 2021.
Okay, cool. So when it first shipped, it felt that the positioning was very much, we have SIP Gateway, so you can take your legacy IP phones from existing PBX and you can support them for a while longer while you burn that investment. But it feels like much more now. We've got DECT, we've got a PA systems, we've got Tango Extend, we've got different use cases using SIP Gateway. So can you talk us through that journey, because it feels like it's much more an important piece of the puzzle than when it initially launched?
Sure. So when we started off with SIP Gateway, what we essentially wanted to enable customers to do was make and receive phone calls on a bunch of third-party IP phones. For example, phones from Poly, phones from Cisco, audio codes, and some Yearling phones as well. So our focus was in terms of devices, just some IP phones, and in terms of scenarios, pretty much make and receive calls, maybe transfer calls, and voicemail. That was pretty much it. As we went along, as we got feedback from customers, we realized there were so many other scenarios, that both in terms of devices and calling scenarios, that our customers wanted even on their third-party devices. So the story that, hey, this is just for basic calling and everything else, you should invest in native devices, wasn't holding good. In many cases, we did not have a native device story. For example, in DECT, right? So there was no native device equivalent for DECT. So as we spent time with customers, we realized we needed to support customers with the devices that they had and with the scenarios that they wanted. So our positioning today, or the way we think about SIP Gateway today, is that SIP Gateway is an essential element of the Teams phone story. It lends completeness to the Teams phone offering, and we want to support more and more customers' devices and their telephony scenarios.
That's great. It takes away some of that complexity of, coming from a voice background myself. There were scenarios where certainly, or back in Skype server days, we set things up directly on SIP to the SBC, and you could do the same thing in Teams. But as you support more and more direct SIP registration to the gateway in the cloud, you're reducing that infrastructure and complexity, which is great, I think.
Right, right. So that is definitely part of the story from our perspective as well. We want to help customers reduce the complexity in their telephony environments. But primarily, what we are looking to do is help customers leverage more of their investments that they've already made in telephony hardware. We want customers to have more options in terms of devices hardware that they can choose from for their telephony needs. So those are also important considerations for us. So to help customers overall, keep their costs down, get the value that they want from their team's phone investments.
Awesome. And so SIP is interesting, right? Because it's a standard. So you end up having to support something that other people write the firmware for on the devices. In
Yeah.
Teams phone, obviously Microsoft own the software on the phone and the software on the back end.
Right.
SIP's slightly different. So talk me through how you decide or kind of why you have a certain list of compatible devices, I guess, like, because it's not every single device, even though it's SIP, you do have an allow list, right?
Yes, that is correct, exactly. So I think there's a why part of it, I think, and there's a what part of it. So on the why part, first of all, there are many devices out there that may support the SIP standard, but may not support the requirements of a cloud-based telephony system that is Teams, right? So, for example, devices may not support HTTP or HTTPS provisioning. Devices may not support a particular version of TLS that we require. So there are some technical constraints. And in some cases, the devices may be platform locked in the sense that they're just not able to communicate with third-party call controls. In other cases, there are, of course, these, our positioning as a service provider, and the way we want to leverage SIP Gateway to extend Teams is that we want to unblock customers to use their devices with Teams, right? So we will want to invest in testing and validating scenarios on devices that customers are actually blocked on, right? So we don't want to open up to pretty much any device out there. We want to be judicious about these investments, and therefore the way we manage it, which is the what part of it, is that we have an allow list of devices that are enabled on our platform. If a device is in that allow list, it comes to us requests for provisioning, then we honor that request and respond with configuration. If a device is outside, we do not honor their provisioning request.
Awesome. And so how do devices get onto that allow list? Is it similar to the certification process? Do the vendors work with you to get through certification, or are you doing the testing yourself? What does that look like?
Right. So certification is an interesting thing, right? So here, since we do not own the stack, as you said, we do not own the stack that is on the phones. So we do not want to take on responsibility for the hardware itself, right? We have, I mean, it's entirely a third-party hardware from our perspective. So what we are taking responsibility for, what we are committing to our customers, is that okay? So if there is a big enough requirement that, hey, certain customer or a certain number of customers are blocked on a certain device, then we will invest in testing and validating that device ourselves, right? Whether our scenarios work well on that device. So we are committing only to the extent that, hey, we have tested scenarios on a particular device running a particular off-the-shelf firmware that is available from the manufacturer, and we've seen that it works. So we are saying that, okay, we can add this to the allow list, right? That is the typical process where it's a customer-led process, where we basically listen to our customers. We value feedback from our customers, where they say that, hey, we need this device to be enabled on SIP gateway so that we are unblocked. So that is one way. Another way is where, say, OEMs reach out to us. The device manufacturers reach out to us because they're getting asks from their customers that we are already using Teams in large parts of our organization, but we are blocked on this telephony part where your particular devices are not enabled on Teams. So how
Yeah.
do I take this particular part of my telephony to Teams? So sometimes manufacturers reach out to us, sometimes we reach out to manufacturers. That works both ways.
So I see on the documentation as well, you've got minimum firmware version and approved firmware version. So obviously that's when you check the devices.
Right.
What happens when the manufacturers rev their firmwares? Do you retest those ever so often? How does that work?
We do. So ideally we would not want to, but let's say if there's a security update from the manufacturer side, we work closely with all of our, not a lot of manufacturing partners, all of our OEM partners.
Yeah.
And in case there is a firmware update that must go out to customers, we prioritize that and we put it through test and validation cycles. Once we have tested that, okay, this particular updated firmware version supports all of the scenarios in the latest build of SIP Gateway, we roll it out to customers. We typically roll it out slowly and maybe by device model or by tenant. We have a couple of levers that we can use to control how that firmware is rolled out to customers. But yes, we are responsible for ensuring firmware updates reach customers. Another case is when, let's say, there is a feature gap and we need a firmware update to enable that feature via SIP gateway, right? As was the case for, let's say, dynamic emergency calling, right? So we had to work with OEM partners to ensure firmware updates were made to enable dynamic emergency calling for devices connected through SIP gateway. So even in some cases, we may request firmware updates. Some cases, the OEM partner may request firmware updates. But regardless, if we have a firmware update, we test it and we roll it out to customers slowly. What we hope for is that we don't have to do it very, very frequently.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it tends to be SIP's been around for a while, hasn't it? So it tends
Right.
to be these things are a bit slower moving than the faster cloud platforms, but there's still work to be done there. You touched on something important, which is pushing the firmware device of the firmware. So for all the compatible devices, do you take responsibility for pushing firmware, or there's some the OEMs tooling and process updates those devices?
Right. So I think there are some nuances there. So well, since we serve a wide variety of customers, we don't want to be making assumptions that whether customer would have the kind of IT environment and skills in house to do their own firmware updates, right?
Yeah, I guess your customer base ranges for SIP Gateway ranges from a small customer with one algo paging unit through
Yeah.
to like an ASIP phone in a lift to thousands of devices highly managed.
Correct. So we do have the option of managing. Well, we don't manage. We just roll out the firmware. It's still, I mean, it's not our firmware. It's still off the shelf firmware that's available
Yeah.
from the manufacturer. But we do manage the rollout of that firmware, and we are responsible for giving the firmware to the device if it provisions with us, right? But we do this for a bunch of IP phones. For example, for DECT, we work with OEM partners because there is an on-premise installation also of DECT. So their OEM partners manage the firmware. Similarly, for analog gateways, we do not manage firmware for analog gateways. And even for overhead paging endpoints, we do not manage firmware, because I think these device types have a significant on-premise presence. So when customers typically have been in the habit of managing these firmwares for these devices locally. So we don't manage firmware for these devices. Going forward, we would want to reduce our footprint in terms of hosting and delivering firmware to devices. But the catch there is that we still need to ensure that the firmware that devices connected to SIP gateway are running on are still able to support scenarios, right?
Yeah.
So our scenarios need to be validated against a certain firmware version. If we just make it kind of free for all, then the number of firmware versions that we have to test and support just explodes. So we cannot effectively support and provide good quality of service to our customers.
Awesome. And so does somebody in the India team have a room with like tons of IP phones of all the different devices?
So the way we want to look at it is that all of our engineers and the PMs based out of India, at least on the SIP gateway team.
Yeah.
So everybody should have experience with using SIP devices. Many times we join our meetings from our SIP phones, right? To see what it is like and what are customers experiencing. We do have a devices lab which is like a few feet away, and we just have a test bed of devices where we test and validate these devices. Yeah.
That's cool. So that's really helped us understand kind of how you approve devices and how it all works. What's the official stance on support? Like I'm a Teams customer. I've got SIP phones, a SIP gateway. Where's the line drawn on who's responsible for what?
So we are responsible as Microsoft for providing the telephony service on your third-party SIP device if it is part of our enabled devices list. We are not responsible for the device itself, right? So if you face issues which say device related, then you wouldn't reach out to us. You would reach out to the manufacturer, right? In some cases, in some cases, it may be difficult for you as a customer to determine whether it is a device issue or whether it is a service issue, right? So in that case, you would reach out to us, and if we determine that, hey, it's a service issue, we work on fixing it for you. If we determine it's not a service issue, then we say redirect you to OEM partners and put in a word that, hey, we got this customer complaint or support case about such and such issue. We investigated and found that it's not a Microsoft Teams issue. Can you please take a look? And we have good relationships with all of our OEM partners, so we try and keep the time that issues spent in support to a minimum, so that customer issue gets resolved quickly.
That's good to understand. And how does it work from a question I get a bit is how it works from a licensing perspective. So you've got two scenarios here. You've got regular Teams users that obviously could potentially also have a SIP IP phone, and then you've got things like the DECT, which are potentially shared devices, or the algo, paging, whatever it may be. So how does that work from a licensing perspective?
Right. So from our perspective, right, a SIP endpoint, if it is connected to SIP gateway, is just another Teams endpoint. So it entirely depends on what account is associated with the device. And so if it's a user with regular Teams endpoints as well as a SIP device, then whatever regular licenses that they would need to use Teams would be applicable to us. We are not asking for any extra licensing, right?
No,
we're not asking for any add-on licenses.
They've got the Teams phone license. They just get the same ability on a SIP device.
Absolutely. So we're just another Teams endpoint. If they're licensed to use Teams, then it will work equally well on the SIP device. Similarly for shared devices, right? So if there is a shared device account, it is licensed to work on Teams native endpoint. It would work equally well on it would work equally well on a SIP endpoint. So again, we're not adding on top of any of the Teams licensing requirements. Today, we do require that SIP endpoints have PSTN connectivity. Okay, but in the short term, we plan to move closer to regular Teams endpoints by removing the phone number requirement. So essentially,
Oh, interesting.
if you have a Teams alias, then you can sign in and associate a SIP device with your account.
So if I only have an internal calling use case for whatever reason, I could use it potentially without that PSTN connectivity.
Correct.
Oh, that's good to know. So
A bunch of other things will need to happen for it to fall into place entirely. For example, you would also need a dial by alias, for example, right?
oh yeah, of
So
course, yeah.
but yeah, I think you're right on point. We do want to enable that scenario.
Awesome. I think that's given us a really good understanding of where it sits and how it works. I'm curious from your point of view, seeing the journey from pre-launch to launch. Like cloud services is so interesting because the scale is just a different league, and Microsoft's massive. What's been most interesting or exciting from you on this kind of SIP gateway journey?
See, the most exciting part and what helps me turn up every day with the same sort of energy is talking to our customers, helping our customers meet their telephony needs, right? I thrive on it. I enjoy meeting with customers, learning their pain points, and helping figure out a roadmap that would address those pain points. I'm also heavily interested in all the support cases that we get for SIP Gateway. So I try and spend a lot of time with our support engineers and customers trying to understand how to solve for the most interesting and challenging problems. That is what drives me, and that's why I've been here with this team 4 years and counting, and I plan to continue being here with this team. In terms of how I've seen SIP Gateway evolve is, well, as I said earlier, we have now when we were in private preview, which was say summer of 2021, we were looking at enabling 2 or 3 scenarios: make a call, receive a call, transfer a call. That's it. And from there to where we are now, it's been immensely satisfying that hey, our service is helping customers meet their telephony requirements, and in some mission critical scenarios as well. I mean, we would be powering phones in schools, in universities, in government agencies, in police departments, in utilities, in say an offshore oil rig, all kinds of work environments. There you would find SIP devices that connect to our service. So I think that's a huge honor customers have given us, and a huge responsibility as well. So the way we see this going forward is that we want to invest more in ensuring that it's always dial tone on devices connected to SIP Gateway. So we want to invest in reliability, invest in security, as well as improving the admin and user experiences and scenarios.
Awesome. No, yeah, it's super interesting. I think by the nature of SIP and your use cases, you're always going to be into some of the most complicated and extreme and unusual use cases because that's where the devices are. So that's really interesting. Oh, Chandranshu, thanks so much for taking the time. I appreciate all the time you've given me on chat and things when we've gone back and forward as well. I hope everybody's enjoyed the pod. If you've got any questions on any SIP Gateway or thoughts or feedback, let us know as well. And maybe we'll have you on again, maybe when we get this, URI based dialing, and have a conversation about that.
It's been a great pleasure being here with you, Tom, and thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us.